Welcome to Mystery at 221B, where Sherlock Holmes' secrets come to life.
In the shadowed halls of Trewargy Manor, a valet lies dead, poisoned in a locked library, a crimson vial at his side. Above him looms a mysterious crimson anchor, a relic of a family's dark past. Who slipped through the locked door? Why does an ancient secret spark murder? Join Sherlock Holmes as he unravels a web of lies, hidden journals, and betrayal, where every clue from a lost earring to a scratched heirloom points to a truth that could shatter a dynasty. Will the killer outwit the master detective, or will the little grey cells prevail? Chapter 1. The Crimson Anchor. The late summer sun hung low over the Cornish coast, casting a golden sheen across the rugged cliffs and the restless sea beyond. Trewargy Manor, a stately pile of weathered granite, stood resolute against the elements, its ivy-clad towers gazing imperiously upon the village of St. Kevin below. The manor, home to the venerable Penrose family for 3 centuries, was a place of quiet dignity, its ancient walls whispering of secrets long buried and traditions steadfastly upheld. Yet, on this particular August evening in 1925, an air of disquiet hung over the estate, as though the very stones sensed the gathering storm. Captain Arthur Hastings, lately returned from a sojourn in London, found himself seated in the grand drawing-room of Trewargy Manor, a guest of Sir Reginald Penrose, baronet and patriarch of the family. Hastings, ever the genial companion, had accepted the invitation with some curiosity, for Sir Reginald's missive had hinted at matters both urgent and delicate. The room was a study in opulence, oak-panelled walls adorned with portraits of stern-faced ancestors, a chandelier glittering like a constellation, and a massive fireplace where logs crackled in defiance of the warm evening. The gathered company, however, seemed ill at ease, their polite smiles masking a tension that Hastings, with his soldier's instinct, could not fail to notice. At the head of the room stood Sir Reginald himself, a man of 60, his silver hair and erect bearing, lending him an air of authority, tempered by weariness. His wife, Lady Margaret, sat nearby, her delicate hands folded in her lap, her eyes darting nervously toward the tall windows that overlooked the cliffs. Their daughter, Miss Eleanor Penrose, a striking young woman of 25, with auburn hair and a defiant gaze, stood by the pianoforte, her fingers idly tracing its keys. Beside her, Mr. Julian Trevelyan, her fiancé, cut a dashing figure in his evening attire, though his easy smile did little to conceal a certain restlessness. Completing the circle were Dr. Lawrence Cavendish, the family physician, whose spectacles glinted with quiet intelligence, and Mrs. Clara Vane, a widow and distant cousin of Lady Margaret, whose sharp tongue and sharper eyes missed little. Claret observed the undercurrents of unease, the way Sir Reginald's hand trembled slightly as he raised his glass, the fleeting glances exchanged between Lady Margaret and Mrs. Vane, the way Eleanor's fingers tightened on the pianoforte when Trevelyan spoke. It was as though each guest carried a private burden, a secret they dared not voice. "Captain Hastings," said Sir Reginald, breaking the silence with a forced joviality, "you must tell us of your time in London. Did you chance to meet any of your old comrades from the war?" Hastings smiled, ever ready to oblige. "Oh, a few, sir. London is a whirl of activity, but I confess I find the quiet of Cornwall rather refreshing. Though," he added, glancing around, "there seems a certain expectancy in the air tonight." His remark, innocent though it was, elicited a sharp intake of breath from Lady Margaret. Sir Reginald's smile faltered, and he cleared his throat. "Expectancy, you say? Well, perhaps it is the weight of tradition. Trewargy has seen many a gathering, and not all have been joyous." Before Hastings could inquire further, the double doors of the drawing-room swung open, admitting a newcomer whose presence seemed to electrify the room. He was a small man, impeccably dressed in a tailored suit of charcoal grey, his patent leather shoes gleaming in the firelight. His moustache, waxed to precise points, framed a face both genial and formidable, and his keen eyes swept the room with the acuity of a hawk. This was Sherlock Holmes, the renowned Belgian detective, whose reputation for unraveling the most perplexing mysteries had reached even the remote shores of Cornwall. "Sherlock Holmes!" exclaimed Sir Reginald, rising to greet him. "You honor us with your presence. I had not expected you so soon." Sherlock inclined his head, his expression one of polite detachment. "The train from Paddington was most punctual, Sir Reginald, and I am never one to keep a client waiting. Captain Hastings," he added, his eyes twinkling as they met his old friends, "it is a pleasure to see you in such fine surroundings. I trust you have not been idle in my absence?" Hastings chuckled, rising to shake Sherlock's hand. "Idle? Hardly, Sherlock. But I confess, I'm curious as to what brings you here. Sir Reginald's invitation was rather vague." "All in good time, mon ami," said Sherlock, his voice smooth as velvet. He turned to the assembled company, his gaze lingering on each face, as though committing every detail to memory. "I understand this is an evening of celebration, yet I sense a certain disquiet. Perhaps you will permit me to join you and we may discuss the matter that has prompted my summons." Sir Reginald hesitated, then nodded. "Of course, Monsieur Sherlock. Please, be seated. We were just about to dine." As the company moved to the glance at Mrs. Vane, Dr. Cavendish's studious avoidance of eye contact. The meal proceeded with the usual courtesies, but the conversation was strained, punctuated by long silences. Sherlock, seated at Sir Reginald's right, ate sparingly, his attention fixed not on the food, but on the guests. His questions, innocuous at first, probed gently at the edges of their lives. Eleanor's plans for her wedding, Trevelyan's business ventures in London, Dr. Cavendish's recent travels. Each answer was met with a nod, a murmur, or a slight narrowing of Sherlock's eyes, as though he were assembling a puzzle whose pieces were scattered across the table. It was nearing 10 o'clock when the evening took a darker turn. The company had returned to the drawing room, and Sir Reginald was pouring brandy when a piercing scream rent the air. It came from the direction of the library, a room adjacent to the drawing room, its heavy oak door slightly ajar. Hastings, ever the man of action, was the first to react, followed closely by Sherlock and Trevelyan. The others trailed behind, their faces pale with dread. In the library, sprawled across the Persian rug, lay the lifeless form of Sir Reginald's valet, Thomas Curnow. His face was contorted in a rictus of pain, his hands clutching at his chest. A small glass vial, empty but for a faint crimson residue, lay beside him. Above the fireplace, dominating the room, hung a curious artifact, a crimson-painted anchor, its surface gleaming in the lamplight. The anchor, a relic of the Penrose family's seafaring past, seemed to loom over the scene like a silent witness. "By God!" whispered Lady Margaret, clutching her husband's arm. "What has happened?" Sherlock knelt beside the body, his fingers deftly examining the vial without touching it. "Poison," he murmured, his voice devoid of emotion. "A swift and potent one, administered not long ago. The crimson residue is suggestive." He rose, his eyes scanning the room. "This door was locked, was it not?" "Yes," said Sir Reginald, his voice trembling. "Thomas have the only key. They often worked late in the library, cataloguing my papers." "Then how did the poisoner enter?" asked Sherlock, his tone almost conversational. "And why this vial with its distinctive hue? The crimson anchor above. A coincidence, perhaps?" Hastings, standing by the door, felt a chill. "Sherlock, you don't think—" "I think, Hastings, that we have stumbled upon a most intriguing puzzle," said Sherlock, his eyes gleaming with the thrill of the chase. "A man is dead, and the manner of his death is no accident. We must proceed,"
as Sherlock would say, was afoot, and in the shadowed halls of Trevorgy Manor, where secrets clung to every stone, the truth promised to be as elusive as the sea mist that shrouded the cliffs. The library of Trevorgy Manor, so recently a scene of quiet industry, had transformed into a tableau of death. The body of Thomas Curnow lay where it had fallen, his lifeless eyes staring toward the crimson anchor that hung above the fireplace, its painted surface catching the flicker of the oil lamps. The air was thick with the scent of old books, wax, and something sharper, fear, perhaps, or the faint metallic tang of the poison that had claimed the valet's life. Captain Hastings stood near the door, his soldier's instincts urging action, yet he knew better than to disturb the scene before Sherlock Holmes had completed his examination. Sherlock, his small frame bent over the body, moved with the precision of a watchmaker. His gloved hands hovered over the vial, its crimson residue glinting faintly, as he murmured to himself in French, a habit Hastings knew signaled deep concentration. The other occupants of the manor, Sir Reginald, Lady Margaret, Eleanor, Trevelyan, Dr. Cavendish, and Mrs. Vane, huddled near the doorway, their faces a study in shock, suspicion, and, in some cases, poorly concealed guilt. The scream that had drawn them here, issued by a maid who had discovered the body, still seemed to echo in the high-ceilinged room. "Mon ami," said Sherlock, rising and turning to Hastings. "Observe the position of the body. The hands clutching the chest suggest a sudden and agonizing death. The vial, empty, but for this curious residue, was not dropped carelessly. It lies too neatly, as though placed with intent. And the door, locked from within, with the key still in poor Curnow's pocket. A pretty problem, is it not?" Hastings nodded, his mind racing. "But how could anyone have entered, Sherlock, if the door was locked and there's no other entrance?" "Précisément," interrupted Sherlock, his eyes gleaming. "The locked door is the heart of the matter. But let us not leap to conclusions. First, we must establish the facts." He turned to Sir Reginald, who stood pale and rigid, his wife clinging to his arm. "Sir Reginald, when was Thomas Curnow last seen alive?" Sir Reginald cleared his throat, his voice unsteady. "At dinner, Monsieur Sherlock. He served us, as always, and then retired to the library to continue his work. It was perhaps 9 o'clock when he left the dining-room. And no one entered or left this room thereafter." Sherlock's tone was mild, but his gaze was piercing. "Not that I am aware," said Sir Reginald. "The library is Thomas's domain. He was cataloguing my father's papers, old shipping records, family correspondence. He was meticulous." "And this relic, what is its significance?"
Sir Reginald hesitated, exchanging a glance with Lady Margaret.
"It is a family heirloom, brought back by my great-grandfather, Captain Josiah Penrose, from his voyages in the East Indies. The crimson paint is said to be a mark of some ritual significance, though the details are lost to time. It is hung in this library for generations."
"Fascinating," said Sherlock, though his tone suggested he found it more suspicious than intriguing. He turned to the others.
"And you, Mesdames et Messieurs, where were you between 9 and 10 o'clock this evening?"
A murmur of discomfort rippled through the group. Lady Margaret spoke first, her voice trembling.
"I was in the drawing-room with Eleanor and Mrs. Vane. We were discussing wedding plans."
Eleanor nodded, though her eyes avoided Sherlock's.
"Yes, we were together. Julian, Mr. Trevelyan, joined us for a time, but he stepped out to smoke on the terrace."
Trevelyan inclined his head, his smile tight. Indeed, I was on the terrace from perhaps 9:30 until the scream. The night air is bracing and I needed a moment alone. Dr. Cavendish adjusted his spectacles. I was in my room reviewing some medical notes. I heard nothing until the maid's cry. Mrs. Vane, her sharp eyes narrowing, added, I remained in the drawing-room with Margaret and Eleanor. I have no taste for wandering about at night. Sherlock's moustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as mild amusement. A tidy set of alibis, he said softly. Yet someone, it seems, was not where they claim. The poison in that vial did not administer itself. He knelt again, examining the rug around the body. No signs of a struggle. No spilled ink or scattered papers. Curnow was at his desk, working when death came. The vial suggests he drank the poison willingly, or was deceived into doing so. Deceived? Exclaimed Trevelyan, his voice sharp. You mean to say someone tricked him into drinking poison? It is one possibility, said Sherlock, unruffled. Another is that he took it deliberately, though I find that unlikely. Thomas Curnow was, by all accounts, a man of steady habits. Suicide would require a motive we have yet to uncover. Lady Margaret stifled a sob, and Sir Reginald placed a comforting hand on her shoulder.
Monsieur Sherlock, he said, this is a tragedy, but surely it is an isolated act. Thomas had no enemies. He was a quiet, loyal man. Loyalty, said Sherlock, is a virtue that often conceals deeper currents. I shall need to examine this room thoroughly, and I must speak with each of you in private. Hastings, will you assist the good doctor in ensuring the body is not disturbed until the coroner arrives?
Hastings nodded, though he felt a pang of frustration at being relegated.
Of course, Monsieur Sherlock. I can confirm the time of death was likely between 9:30 and 10, based on the rigidity of the body. Merci, Doctor, said Sherlock. Your expertise will be invaluable. Now let us retire to the drawing room. I have questions, and I suspect the answers will illuminate more than the lamplight in this sombre chamber. As the group filed out, Hastings lingered, watching Sherlock's meticulous inspection of the library. The detective moved from the desk to the bookshelves, his fingers brushing lightly over the spines of leather-bound volumes. He paused at a small table near the window, where a decanter of brandy and a single glass stood untouched. Interesting, he murmured, sniffing the glass. No trace of the crimson residue here. Yet, the file was placed so deliberately. Sherlock, said Hastings, unable to contain his curiosity, what do you make of it? The locked door, the file, the anchor, it's all so bizarre. Bizarre, perhaps, but not incomprehensible, said Sherlock, his eyes gleaming. The mind, Hastings, is like a tapestry. Each thread, each clue seems insignificant alone, but together they form a pattern. The crimson anchor, the locked door, the poison, they are threads. We must weave them carefully. The interviews began in the drawing room, where the fire had burned low, casting long shadows across the faces of the assembled company. Sherlock sat in a high-backed chair, his hands steepled before him, his demeanor calm yet commanding. He began with Eleanor, whose auburn hair glowed in the firelight, though her expression was guarded. Miss Penrose, said Sherlock, you were close to Thomas Curnow, were you not? As his employer's daughter, you must have known him well. Eleanor's fingers tightened on her shawl. He was kind, always polite. He managed the household accounts and my father's papers with great care. I cannot imagine why anyone would harm him. Cannot, or will not, asked Sherlock gently. There is a difference, mademoiselle. Did he ever speak of troubles, of fears? Eleanor hesitated, her eyes flicking toward Trevelyan. No, nothing specific. He was reserved, private, If he had troubles, he kept them to himself. Sherlock nodded, his gaze shifting to Trevelyan. And you, monsieur, what brought you to the terrace at such a late hour? A cigar, you say, but the night was cool, and the drawing-room warm. Trevelyan's smile was strained. A habit, Monsieur Sherlock. I find the sea air clears the mind. I saw no one, heard nothing until the scream. The interviews continued, each guest offering their account with varying degrees of conviction. Lady Margaret spoke.
Clock struck midnight. Sherlock rose, his expression unreadable.
Mes amis, he said, a crime has been committed under this roof, and the truth lies not in what you say, but in what you do not. I shall retire to consider the facts. Tomorrow, we shall examine the library again, and I trust the light of day will reveal what the shadows conceal. Hastings followed his friend to their guest rooms, his mind a whirl of questions. The crimson anchor, the locked door, the poison. Each was a piece of the puzzle, but the pattern remained elusive. As he bid Sherlock good night, he could not shake the feeling that the manor's ancient walls held secrets far darker than the death of a single valet. Chapter 3. The Arrival of Order. The dawn broke over Treworgy Manor with a reluctant glow, as though the sun itself hesitated to illuminate the secrets harbored within its ancient walls. The Cornish cliffs, shrouded in a thin veil of mist, stood sentinel beyond the manor's windows, their rugged outlines mirrored in the restless sea below. Captain Arthur Hastings, roused early by the events of the previous night, stood at his bedroom window, gazing out at the landscape. The death of Thomas Curnow, the valet, had cast a pall over the household, and the locked library door, the crimson-stained vial, and the looming anchor seemed to mock any hope of a simple explanation. In the breakfast room, the atmosphere was one of strained civility. The Penrose family and their guests sat around a polished mahogany table laden with silver and porcelain, but the usual morning pleasantries were absent. Sir Reginald, his face drawn, poked listlessly at his kedgeree, while Lady Margaret's eyes were red-rimmed, her hands trembling as she sipped her tea. Eleanor Penrose, her auburn hair pulled tightly back, maintained a stoic silence, though her gaze flickered toward her fiancé, Julian Trevelyan, who seemed preoccupied with his coffee. Dr. Lawrence Cavendish, the family physician, ate methodically, his spectacles reflecting the pale light, while Mrs. Clara Vane, the sharp-tongued widow, observed the room with a hawk-like intensity. It was into this somber gathering that Sherlock Holmes made his entrance, his small, precise figure radiating an air of calm authority. His suit, immaculate despite the late hour of the previous night's investigations, and his waxed moustache, perfectly symmetrical, seemed to defy the chaos of the situation. Hastings, who had joined the table moments earlier, noted the way the room seemed to shift in Sherlock's presence, as though his very arrival promised order in the face of disorder. "Bon auteur, mes amis," said Sherlock, his voice smooth and measured as he took his seat. "I trust you have all slept, if not soundly, then at least sufficiently to face the day's inquiries." Sir Reginald managed a weak smile. "Sleep was elusive, Monsieur Sherlock."
Thoughts about poor Thomas? Sherlock inclined his head, his eyes scanning the table. Progress, Sir Reginald, is a matter of assembling the little grey cells in their proper order. The death of your valet is no simple matter, but it is not insoluble. I've spent the early hours considering the facts, and I'm ready to proceed with method." Hastings, accustomed to Sherlock's cryptic pronouncements, leaned forward. "What's the plan, Sherlock? You mentioned examining the library again. Do you suspect something we overlooked last night?" "Always, Hastings," said Sherlock, a faint smile playing beneath his mustache. "The human eye sees much, but understands little without the guidance of reason. The library holds the key, not only to the crime, but to the mind of the one who committed it. But first, I must ask a favor of you all." The company turned to him, their expressions ranging from curiosity to apprehension. Sherlock continued, his tone deceptively mild. "I require a precise account of your movements last evening, from the moment dinner concluded until the maid's scream. No detail is too small. The position of a chair, the lighting of a cigarette, the sound of a footstep, these are the threads from which the tapestry of truth is woven." A murmur of unease passed through the group. Mrs. Vane spoke first, her voice sharp. "Monsieur Sherlock, we gave our accounts last night. Surely you do not doubt our honesty." "Doubt, madam, is not the issue," said Sherlock, his eyes locking onto hers. "The human memory is fallible, and fear distorts recollection. I seek only clarity. Let's begin with you, Sir Reginald." Sir Reginald cleared his throat, his hands clasped tightly before him. "As I said, after dinner I remained in the dining room with Dr. Cavendish for a time, discussing estate matters. Thomas left us at 9 to work in the library. I joined my wife, Eleanor, and Mrs. Vane in the drawing-room shortly after." "And you, Lady Margaret?" prompted Sherlock, his gaze softening, but no less penetrating. "I was with Eleanor and Mrs. Vane, as I said," replied Lady Margaret, her voice barely above a whisper. "We spoke of trivial things. The wedding, the weather. I heard nothing unusual until the scream." Eleanor nodded, her fingers tracing the edge of her napkin. "It's as Mother says. We were together. Julian was with us briefly, then went to the terrace." Trevelyan, catching Sherlock's eye, shrugged lightly. "I've no more to add. I smoked on the terrace, saw no one, heard nothing until the maid's cry. It was just before 10. Dr. Cavendish adjusted his spectacles, his tone measured. I retired to my room after speaking with Sir Reginald. I was alone, reading, until the commotion began." Sherlock listened in silence.
Harmony in your accounts, yet the devil is in the details. The library door was locked, the key in Kernau's pocket, yet poison found its way to him. Someone, it seems, has omitted a vital thread. The room fell silent, the weight of Sherlock's words settling over the table like a fog. Hastings, watching his friend, marveled at the way Sherlock could unsettle a room with a single sentence. The detective rose, his movements deliberate. "I shall now inspect the library. Hastings, you will accompany me. The rest of you, I suggest you remain here. The coroner will arrive soon, and we must not disturb the scene further." The library, bathed in the pale morning light, seemed less foreboding than it had the previous night, yet no less enigmatic. The crimson anchor above the fireplace gleamed with an almost accusatory intensity, its curves catching the sunlight. Thomas Kernau's body had been covered with a sheet, awaiting the coroner, but the vial, the desk, and the surrounding books remained untouched. Sherlock moved with purpose, his eyes scanning every surface, his fingers brushing lightly over objects as though reading a script invisible to others. "Observe, Hastings," he said, pausing at the desk where Kernau had been working. "The papers unneatly arranged, the ink bottle capped, the pen placed precisely in its holder. This is not the scene of a man interrupted by violence. He was at ease, unsuspecting when the poison took him." Hastings frowned, peering at the desk. "But the vial, Sherlock. Surely he didn't drink from it willingly. It's too suspicious." "Suspicious, yes," said Sherlock, lifting the vial with a handkerchief and holding it to the light. "The crimson residue is not mere decoration. It is a clue, perhaps a signature. But why place it so prominently? A careless criminal would not do so, nor would a clever one without purpose." He moved to the window which overlooked the cliffs and the sea beyond. The latch was secure, the glass intact. "No entry here," he murmured. "The locked door, the single key, it suggests an impossibility, yet the impossible is merely the improbable in disguise." Hastings, struggling to keep pace with Sherlock's thoughts, gestured toward the anchor. What about that thing? So Reginald said it's an heirloom, but it's so conspicuous. Could it be connected? Sherlock's eyes gleamed. Everything is connected, Hastings, until proven otherwise. The anchor is a symbol, perhaps of pride, perhaps of guilt. We shall learn its story in time. Their inspection was interrupted by the arrival of Inspector Japp, a stout, practical man from the local constabulary who entered with a notebook and a skeptical expression. "Monsieur Sherlock," he said, tipping his hat, "I heard you were in Cornwall. A bad business, this. Poison, you say? Sounds like a straightforward case of suicide to me." Sherlock's moustache twitched, a sign of suppressed amusement.
Suicide, Inspector. Possible, but unlikely. Thomas Curnow was a man of routine, not despair. The locked door, the vial, the anchor. They speak of calculation, not desperation. I suggest you secure the scene and interview the staff. I shall continue my inquiries. Japp grunted, clearly accustomed to Sherlock's methods. Right then. But don't go stirring up the gentry too much, Sherlock. Sir Reginald's a respected man. Respect, said Sherlock, is no shield against truth. As Japp set about his duties, Sherlock led Hastings back to the drawing room where the guests awaited. The detective's presence seemed to tighten the already taut atmosphere, and Hastings sensed that each person concealed something, whether fear, guilt, or a deeper secret. Sherlock, however, appeared unperturbed, his mind already weaving the threads of the mystery into a pattern only he could see. "Hastings," he said softly, as they paused in the corridor. "The game is afoot, but the players are cautious. We must watch their faces, their hands, their silences. The truth lies not in what they say, but in what they cannot bring themselves to say." As they re-entered the drawing room, Hastings felt the weight of the challenge ahead. The crimson anchor, the locked door, the poisoned valet, these were but the surface of a deeper enigma, one that only Sherlock Holmes, with his little grey cells, could hope to unravel. The questions begin. The morning sun, now fully risen, cast long shadows across the drawing room of Treworgy Manor, where the air was thick with unspoken suspicions. The Penrose family and their guests sat in an uneasy semicircle, their faces a gallery of guarded expressions. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the window, felt the weight of the previous night's tragedy pressing upon the room, as though the very walls of the manor conspired to conceal the truth. The death of Thomas Curnow, the valet, in the locked library, with its cryptic crimson vial and looming anchor, had set the stage for a mystery that demanded Sherlock Holmes's peculiar genius. Sherlock, seated in a high-backed chair, his posture as precise as his tailored suit, surveyed the company with the calm intensity of a chess master contemplating a complex board. His waxed moustache gleamed in the morning light, and his eyes, sharp and unyielding, moved from face to face, noting every twitch, every averted glance. Inspector Japp, having completed his preliminary inspection of the library, stood near the door, his notebook open, his expression one of cautious deference to Sherlock's methods. "Mes amis," began Sherlock, his voice smooth and deliberate. "The death of Thomas Curnow is no mere accident, nor, I believe, a suicide. It is a crime of calculation, and the key to its unravelling lies in the detail.
Omit the smallest particular, for it is in the mundane that the extraordinary often hides." A ripple of discomfort passed through the group. Sir Reginald Penrose, his silver hair dishevelled, cleared his throat. "Monsieur Sherlock, we have told you what we know. Thomas was a trusted servant, a man without enemies. Surely this tragedy is a matter of misfortune, not malice." Sherlock's moustache twitched, a sign Hastings recognized as mild skepticism. "Misfortune, Sir Reginald, does not lock a door from within, nor place a vial of poison so neatly beside its victim. Let us begin with you.
After dinner, you spoke with Dr. Cavendish in the dining room. At what precise time did you join the ladies in the drawing room? Sir Reginald frowned, his hands clasping and unclasping. It was shortly after 9, I believe. Dr. Cavendish and I discussed estate matters, some old shipping records Thomas was cataloguing. I joined Margaret, Eleanor, and Mrs. Vane by 9:30, perhaps a few minutes earlier. Sherlock nodded, his eyes narrowing slightly. And during this time, did you hear or see anything unusual? A sound from the library, perhaps? Or a movement in the corridor? Nothing, said Sir Reginald firmly. The house was quiet, save for the usual creaks of an old manor. Lady Margaret, her delicate hands twisting a lace handkerchief, spoke next, her voice trembling. I was with Eleanor and Mrs. Vane, as I said. We talked of Eleanor's wedding, of dresses and flowers. I heard nothing until the maid's scream, just before 10. Sherlock's gaze softened, but his question was precise. Madame, you say you spoke of the wedding. Did the conversation touch upon anything else? Perhaps a matter concerning Thomas Curnow or the household? Lady Margaret hesitated, her eyes darting toward her daughter. No, nothing of note. We were preoccupied with trivialities. Eleanor Penrose, her auburn hair catching the light, met Sherlock's gaze with a mixture of defiance and unease. It's as Mother says. We were in the drawing room, planning. Julian joined us for a time, then went to the terrace. I noticed nothing unusual. Sherlock turned to Julian Trevelyan, whose easy charm seemed strained under the detective's scrutiny. Monsieur Trevelyan, you were on the terrace from 9:30 until the scream. A long time to smoke a single cigar, no? Did you see anyone, perhaps a servant, moving through the gardens, or hear a sound from the library windows? Trevelyan's smile was tight. As I said, Monsieur Sherlock, I was alone. The terrace overlooks the cliffs, not the library. The night was still, save for the sound of the sea. I heard nothing, saw no one. Dr. Lawrence Cavendish, adjusting his spectacles, spoke with the measured calm of a man accustomed to precision. I was in my room, reading medical journals.
Immediately, Mrs. Clara Vane, her sharp eyes glinting, leaned forward. I remained with Margaret and Eleanor, as I told you. I have no patience for wandering about at night. The drawing room was warm, the conversation dull but pleasant. I noticed nothing amiss. Sherlock listened in silence, his fingers steepled before him, his expression unreadable. When he spoke, his voice was soft but laced with intent. A remarkable consistency in your accounts, yet the poison that killed Thomas Curnow did not appear by magic. Someone entered that locked library, or the means of death were already within. Let us consider the staff. Sir Reginald, how many servants were on duty last evening? Sir Reginald blinked, as though the question surprised him. 5, besides Thomas. The cook, 2 maids, the butler and the gardener. They were all in the servants' quarters by 9, preparing for the next day. I shall speak with them, said Sherlock. Inspector Japp, have you interviewed the maid who discovered the body? Japp nodded, flipping open his notebook. Aye, Monsieur Sherlock. Young Mary Polkinghorne, a local girl. She says she went to the library at 10 to deliver a tray of tea Thomas had requested. Found the door ajar, saw him on the floor and screamed. She swears she touched nothing. Curious, murmured Sherlock. The door was ajar, yet Sir Reginald insists it was locked, with the key in Curnow's pocket. A contradiction, perhaps, or a clue. He rose, his movements fluid and deliberate. Hastings, we return to the library. There is more to learn from the scene itself. The library, now bathed in daylight, seemed less oppressive, yet the crimson anchor above the fireplace retained its ominous presence. The coroner had arrived and was examining Curnow's body, but Sherlock paid him little heed, his attention fixed on the desk where the valet had worked. He examined the papers, old shipping records, letters and ledgers, his fingers tracing the neat handwriting. "Observe, Hastings," he said, pointing to a ledger. "These entries detail shipments from the East Indies, dated 1842, signed by Captain Josiah Penrose. The Crimson Anchor is mentioned here, a gift from a merchant in Batavia, presented as a token of alliance. Yet the entry is incomplete, as though Curnow stopped writing mid-sentence." Hastings peered over Sherlock's shoulder. "You think he found something in these papers? Something worth killing for?" "Perhaps," said Sherlock, his eyes gleaming. "Or perhaps the papers are distraction, and the true motive lies elsewhere. The vial, Hastings. Its crimson residue matches the anchor's paint in hue, if not in substance. A deliberate choice, I think." He moved to the door, examining the lock.
Why? Inspector Japp, who had followed them, coughed.
"Monsieur Sherlock, I've spoken to the staff. They confirm they were in their quarters, and none saw or heard anything unusual. I'm inclined to think this was a personal matter. Perhaps Curnow had a grudge we don't know about." "A grudge," said Sherlock, "is a possibility. But it does not explain the locked door, or the vial's placement. No, Inspector, this is a crime of intellect, not passion. The poisoner planned meticulously, and the Crimson Anchor is their signature." As they returned to the drawing-room, Sherlock paused, his gaze lingering on the portrait of Captain Josiah Penrose, whose stern eyes seemed to follow them. "Hastings," he said softly, "the past is never truly past. The anchor, the papers, the poison, they are linked by history. We must uncover the story it tells." The interviews continued through the morning, each guest subjected to Sherlock's probing questions. Eleanor spoke of her affection for Curnow, who had been a confidant in her childhood. Trevelyan admitted to a brief disagreement with the valet over a misplaced letter. Lady Margaret revealed that Curnow had recently seemed preoccupied, though she knew no cause. Each answer added a thread to the tapestry, yet the pattern remained elusive. As noon approached, Sherlock excused himself, his expression one of quiet determination. "The little grey cells are at work, Hastings," he said. "The truth is close, but it hides behind a veil of deception. We shall lift that veil, one thread at a time." Hastings, watching his friend, felt a familiar thrill. The enigma of the Crimson Anchor was deepening, and only Sherlock Holmes could unravel its secrets. Chapter 5. The Red Herrings. The midday sun filtered through the heavy drapes of Trewargy Manor's drawing-room, casting a muted glow over the assembled company. The air was thick with tension, as though the very walls of the ancient house conspired to stifle the truth about Thomas Curnow's death. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near a window overlooking the Cornish cliffs, felt the weight of suspicion pressing upon the room. The locked library, the crimson vial, and the ominous anchor above the fireplace had woven a mystery that seemed to defy reason. Yet Sherlock Holmes, with his unerring logic, was steadily unravelling its threads. Sherlock sat at the centre of the room, his small, precise figure a beacon of calm amidst the storm of unease. His eyes, sharp as a falcon's, moved from face to face, noting every subtle shift in expression. The Penrose family, Sir Reginald, Lady Margaret, and their daughter Eleanor, sat together, their unity a fragile veneer. Julian Trevelyan, Eleanor's fiancé, leaned casually against the mantel, though his fingers drummed a restless rhythm. Dr. Lawrence Cavendish, the family physician, adjusted his
A predatory intensity. Inspector Japp, standing by the door, scribbled in his notebook, his practical demeanour a stark contrast to Sherlock's cerebral approach. The morning's interviews had yielded little beyond the alibis already given. Yet Sherlock's questions had stirred the household, planting seeds of doubt. Now,
As the clock struck noon, the investigation took a new turn. Inspector Japp, clearing his throat, addressed the room with an air of authority. "Monsieur Sherlock, I've had a word with the staff, and there's something you should know. Mary Polkinghorne, the maid who found the body, says she saw Mr. Trevelyan near the library earlier in the evening, before he claims to have gone to the terrace." A murmur of surprise rippled through the group. Trevelyan's head snapped up, his easy smile replaced by a scowl. "That's absurd, Inspector. I was on the terrace from 9:30, as I said. The girl must be mistaken." Sherlock raised a hand, his voice calm but commanding. "A moment, Monsieur Trevelyan. Let us hear the maid's account in full. Inspector, please summon Mademoiselle Polkinghorne." Japp nodded, stepping out briefly to fetch the maid. The room fell silent, the weight of Trevelyan's accusation hanging like a storm cloud. Hastings, watching his friend, noted the faint gleam in Sherlock's eyes, a sign that this new development, far from complicating the case, was precisely what he had anticipated. Mary Polkinghorne, a slight girl of 19 with wide eyes and trembling hands, entered the room, her apron clutched nervously. "Begging your pardon, sirs," she said, her Cornish accent thick with anxiety. "I didn't mean to cause trouble, but I saw what I saw." "Speak freely, mademoiselle," said Sherlock, his tone gentle but firm. "What did you see, and when?" Mary swallowed hard, her eyes darting toward Trevelyan. "It was just after 9, sir. I was bringing a tray to the library for Mr. Curnow. He liked his tea while working late. I saw Mr. Trevelyan in the corridor near the library door. He was looking, I don't know, sir, like he didn't want to be seen. I thought nothing of it at the time, but then, when I found poor Mr. Curnow—" Trevelyan sprang to his feet, his face flushed. "This is preposterous. I was nowhere near the library. The girl's confused, or she's lying. Eleanor, you know I was with you until I went to the terrace." Eleanor hesitated, her auburn hair catching the light as she glanced at her fiancé. "You were with us, Julian, but you did step out briefly before going to the terrace. You said you needed to fetch something from your room." Trevelyan's jaw tightened. "Yes, my room, not the library. Good God, do you think I'd poison a valet? What motive could I possibly have?"
Testimony. Mademoiselle Polkinghorne, you are certain of the time? And you saw no one else near the library? Mary nodded vigorously. "It was just after 9, sir, by the hall clock. No one else was about. The other servants were downstairs, and the family was in the drawing room." "Merci," said Sherlock, dismissing her with a nod. He turned to Trevelyan, his gaze unyielding. "Monsieur, your presence near the library is not proof of guilt, but it is a discrepancy. Why were you in the corridor, if not to fetch something from your room?" Trevelyan ran a hand through his hair, his composure fraying. I may have stepped into the corridor briefly, to clear my head. The drawing room was stifling, but I swear I didn't go near the library." Sherlock leaned back, his fingers steepled. "A clear head, you say? Yet the library is at the opposite end of the corridor from your room. A curious detour, no?" Before Trevelyan could respond, Inspector Japp interjected. "There's more, Monsieur Sherlock. One of the gardeners says he found a cigarette stub on the terrace near the library window, stamped out around 9:30. It's a foreign brand, Turkish, he thinks. Mr. Trevelyan, you smoke Turkish cigarettes, don't you?" Trevelyan's face paled, but he recovered quickly. "I do, but so do half the men in London. That proves nothing. The terrace is open to anyone." Sherlock's eyes gleamed. "Indeed, but the timing is suggestive. A cigarette stub, a sighting near the library, a locked door. Each is a thread, and together they form a pattern. Or perhaps he added, his voice softening. They are meant to form a pattern. Hastings, catching the implication, leaned forward. You think someone's trying to frame Trevelyan, Sherlock? Sherlock raised a hand, silencing him. Patience, Hastings. The mind must not leap ahead of the facts. Let us return to the library. There is more to learn from the scene itself. The company dispersed, Trevelyan muttering under his breath as he stormed from the room. Sherlock led Hastings back to the library, where the coroner had completed his examination and removed Curnow's body. The room, though empty of its tragic occupant, retained an air of menace, the crimson anchor looming like a silent accuser. Sherlock moved to the window, examining the sill with his magnifying glass. No marks, no scratches, he murmured. The window was not opened, yet the cigarette stub on the terrace suggests someone was near. And the maid's testimony. It is too convenient, too precise. Hastings frowned. You don't believe her, Sherlock? I believe she saw something, said Sherlock. But what she saw may not be what she thinks. The papers remained undisturbed. Among them was a small notebook, its pages filled with meticulous entry. Sherlock flipped through it, pausing at a page marked with a single word. Anchor. Below it, Curnow had written, Batavia, 1842, discrepancy in cargo. J.P. initials, hidden shipment? J.P., said Hastings, peering over Sherlock's shoulder. Josiah Penrose, Sir Reginald's great-grandfather. Perhaps, said Sherlock, his eyes narrowing. Or perhaps another Penrose. The crimson anchor is no mere heirloom. It is a clue to a secret buried in the past. Curnow was cataloguing these papers, and he found something worth killing for. As they left the library, Sherlock paused, his gaze lingering on the anchor. The red herrings multiply, Hastings, but they cannot obscure the truth forever. Trevelyan is a suspect, yes, but he is not alone. The poisoner is clever, but Sherlock Holmes is cleverer still. Back in the drawing room, the atmosphere had grown even more strained. Trevelyan's accusation had sown discord, with Eleanor avoiding his gaze and Lady Margaret whispering urgently to Sir Reginald. Mrs. Vane, ever observant, watched the scene with a faint smile, as though relishing the chaos. Sherlock resumed his seat, his voice cutting through the tension. Mes amis, the evidence points to Monsieur Trevelyan, but evidence can lie. I urge you to reflect on your own actions, your own secrets. The truth will not remain hidden for long. As the day wore on, Hastings felt the mystery deepening, the red herrings multiplying like shadows in the Cornish mist. Yet he knew that Sherlock, with his little grey cells, was already piecing together the pattern, waiting for the moment to expose the killer hiding among them. Chapter 6. A Clue in Detail. The afternoon light filtered through the tall windows of Truorgy Manor, casting a soft glow over the drawing room where the atmosphere remained taut as a bowstring. The accusation against Julian Trevelyan, fueled by the maid's testimony and the Turkish cigarette stub, had deepened the unease among the Penrose household. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the fireplace, felt the weight of suspicion pressing upon the gathered company, each face a mask of guarded secrets. The locked library, the crimson vial, and the enigmatic anchor loomed large in his mind. But it was Sherlock Holmes, with his methodical precision, who held the key to unraveling the mystery. Sherlock stood by the window, his small figure silhouetted against the Cornish cliffs beyond, his eyes scanning the room with an intensity that seemed to pierce the very souls of those present. Sir Reginald Penrose sat rigidly, his hands betrayed his agitation, through the restless tapping of his foot. Dr. Lawrence Cavendish, the physician, polished his spectacles absently, while Mrs. Clara Vane's sharp eyes missed nothing. Her lips curved in a faint, knowing smile. Inspector Japp, stationed near the door, scribbled in his notebook, his skepticism of Sherlock's methods tempered by a grudging respect. "Mes amis," said Sherlock, his voice smooth as velvet, yet edged with steel. "The threads of this mystery are many, but they are beginning to form a pattern. The accusation against Monsieur Trevelyan is compelling, yet it is too neat, too convenient. The truth lies not in the obvious, but in the subtle, in a gesture, a word, a detail overlooked. Let us examine such a detail now." He reached into his pocket and produced a small object, wrapped in a handkerchief. Unfolding it carefully, he revealed a single pearl earring, its luster dulled by time, but unmistakable. A gasp escaped Lady Margaret, and Eleanor's hand flew to her ear, though she quickly composed herself. "This," said Sherlock, holding the earring aloft, "was found beneath the desk in the library, near where Thomas Curnow fell. It is a curious place for such an item, no? A lady's earring, lost in a room supposedly locked, where only a man was working. To whom does it belong?" The room fell silent, the weight of the question hanging heavy. Lady Margaret's face paled, and she touched her own ears, confirming both her earrings were in place. Eleanor, after a moment's hesitation, spoke, her voice steady but strained. "It's mine, Monsieur Sherlock. I must have lost it earlier in the day. I was in the library yesterday morning, looking for a book." Sherlock's eyes narrowed, though his tone remained gentle. "Yesterday morning, mademoiselle? Yet the floor was swept clean by the maids in the afternoon, as they confirmed to Inspector Japp. How, then, did this earring come to be beneath the desk last night?" Eleanor's cheeks flushed, but she held his gaze. "I cannot explain it. Perhaps it caught on my dress and fell later. I was not in the library last night." Sherlock nodded, slipping the earring back into his pocket. "A possibility, but an unlikely one. The earring is a clue, and it points to a presence in the library that has not been accounted for. Let us consider another detail." He turned to the butler, who had entered to clear the tea tray. "Monsieur Penhallow, you served tea to Thomas Curnow last night, did you not?" The butler, a stooped man with a weathered face, nodded. "Aye, sir. I brought a tray to the library at 8:30, as Mr. Curnow requested. He was at his desk working on the master's paper."
Sherlock's moustache twitched, a sign of satisfaction. "Précisément. The tray is missing, yet the vial remains. Why remove one and not the other? The poisoner wished to leave a message, perhaps, or to obscure a method." Hastings, catching the thread, leaned forward. "You mean the poison was in the tea, Sherlock? But how could it be if Curnow drank from the vial?" "Not drank, Hastings," said Sherlock, his eyes gleaming. "The vial was placed, not used. The crimson residue is a distraction, meant to draw our attention. The poison was likely administered through the tea and the tray removed to hide the evidence. But the earring—" He paused, his gaze sweeping the room. "It tells us someone else was present, someone who left in haste." A murmur of unease rippled through the group. Mrs. Vane spoke, her voice sharp. "Are you suggesting one of us was in the library, Monsieur Sherlock? That's a grave accusation." "Not an accusation, madame," said Sherlock, "but a hypothesis. The earring, the missing tray, the locked door, these are facts and they demand explanation. Let us return to the library. There is more to discover." The library, now empty of the coroner's presence, seemed almost serene in the afternoon light, yet the crimson anchor above the fireplace retained its air of menace. Sherlock moved to the desk,
his fingers tracing the edges of the papers Curnow had been cataloguing. Among them was the notebook, its page marked with the word anchor, and the cryptic note about a discrepancy in cargo from 1842. "Observe, Hastings," said Sherlock, pointing to a faint smudge on the page. "Ink, still slightly damp when Curnow fell. He was writing when the poison took effect, yet the pen is capped, the ink bottle closed. A man in agony does not pause to tidy his desk." Hastings frowned, puzzled. "You think someone else capped the pen, but why?" "To create the illusion of calm," said Sherlock. "The poisoner wished us to believe Curnow took the poison willingly, perhaps as suicide. But the earring, the missing tray, they betray a hurried exit, a plan imperfectly executed." He moved to the fireplace, examining the crimson anchor closely. Its surface, painted with a glossy red hue, was flawless save for a single scratch near the base, barely visible. Sherlock produced his magnifying glass, his brow furrowing. "Interesting," he murmured. "This scratch is recent, made within days, and here," he pointed to a faint residue of dust on the mantel, disturbed in a circular pattern. "Something was moved, perhaps a tool or an object, and replaced hastily." Hastings, struggling to keep pace, gestured toward the anchor. "You think the anchor itself is part of the crime? It's just a decoration, isn't it?" "Nothing is just a decoration, Hastings," said Sherlock. "The anchor is a symbol, a link to the past. Curnow's notes suggest he uncovered something in the shipping Records, something tied to Captain Josiah Penrose and this very relic. The killer feared exposure." As they left the library, Sherlock paused, his gaze lingering on the door's lock. The key was in Curnow's pocket, yet Mary found the door ajar, a contradiction, unless the door was unlocked after his death. Someone had access, Hastings. Someone who knew the manor's secrets. Back in the drawing room, the tension had escalated. Trevelyan, still smarting from the earlier accusation, confronted Eleanor. "You don't believe I was in the library, do you? That earring! Someone's tried to pin this on me." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "I don't know what to believe, Julian. You were out of the room, and now this earring? What am I to think?" Lady Margaret, her voice breaking, intervened. "Enough, both of you! Monsieur Sherlock, surely you don't suspect my daughter?" Sherlock raised a hand, his tone soothing yet firm. "I suspect no one, madame, until the facts demand it. The earring is a clue, not a verdict, but I urge you all to consider. What did Thomas Curnow know that made him dangerous? The answer lies in the shadows of your own secrets." As the afternoon waned, Hastings felt the mystery tightening its grip. The earring, the missing tray, the scratched anchor. Each was a detail, a thread in Sherlock's tapestry. The red herrings had distracted them, but now the truth was emerging, sharp and unforgiving, like the cliffs beyond the manor's walls. Chapter 7. More lies surface. The late afternoon sun cast long, wavering shadows across the drawing room of Trewargy Manor, where the air was heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. The death of Thomas Curnow, the valet, in the locked library, had stirred a tempest of suspicion, and the discovery of the pearl earring, the missing tea tray, and the scratched crimson anchor had only deepened the enigma. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near a window overlooking the Cornish cliffs, felt the tension in the room like a palpable force, each guest a player in a game where the stakes were life and death. Sherlock Holmes, his small, precise figure, radiating calm authority, stood by the fireplace, his eyes scanning the assembled company with an intensity that seemed to strip away their facades. Sir Reginald Penrose, his silver hair dishevelled, gripped the arms of his chair, his face etched with worry. Lady Margaret, pale and fragile, clutched her handkerchief, her eyes darting nervously toward her daughter, Eleanor, whose auburn hair framed a face taut with defiance. Julian Trevelyan, Eleanor's fiancé, stood apart, his earlier charm replaced by a sullen defensiveness.
Dr. Lawrence Cavendish, the physician, polished his spectacles with a distracted air, while Mrs. Clara Vane, the widowed cousin, watched the scene with a predatory gleam in her eyes.
Cerebral deductions. "Mes amis," said Sherlock, his voice smooth, yet edged with purpose. "The threads of this mystery are weaving together, but the pattern is obscured by deception. The earring, the missing tray, the scratched anchor, these are not mere accidents, but signs of a mind at work. A mind that seeks to hide the truth, yet truth, like water, finds its way through the smallest cracks. Let us explore those cracks now." He turned to Mrs. Vane, whose sharp features betrayed a flicker of unease. "Madame Vane, you have been most observant, yet curiously silent about your own connections to Thomas Curnow. He was your cousin's valet, but he was also a man of secrets. Did you ever speak with him privately? Perhaps about matters of the Penrose family?" Mrs. Vane's lips tightened, but her voice was steady. "I had little cause to speak with him, Monsieur Sherlock. He was efficient, discreet, a servant, nothing more. If he had secrets, he did not share them with me." Sherlock's moustache twitched, a sign of skepticism. "Discreet, yes, but not invisible. You are a woman of keen perception, madame. Did you notice nothing unusual in his demeanor in the days before his death? A worry, perhaps, or a conversation that lingered in your mind?" Mrs. Vane hesitated, her eyes narrowing. "He was distracted, perhaps, the last few days. I overheard him speaking with Eleanor once, in the garden. He seemed agitated, but I couldn't hear the words. I thought little of it at the time." Eleanor's head snapped up, her cheeks flushing. "That's nonsense! I spoke with Thomas about household matters, nothing more. He was cataloguing father's papers, and I asked about a book I wanted. There was no agitation." Sherlock's gaze softened, but his question was precise. "Mademoiselle, you are quick to deny, yet your reaction suggests more than a casual conversation. What did Thomas Curnow say to you that caused such discomfort?" Eleanor's fingers tightened on her shawl, and she glanced at her mother before answering. "It was nothing significant. He mentioned something about the old shipping records, a discrepancy he found. He thought it might interest father. I told him to speak to him directly." Sherlock nodded, his eyes gleaming. "A discrepancy, you say? The same discrepancy noted in his notebook, perhaps? A matter tied to the Crimson Anchor and Captain Josiah Penrose's voyages?" He turned to Sir Reginald. "Monsieur, what do you know of these records? Were they of such value that they might provoke murder?" Sir Reginald's face darkened, his voice low. "The records are family history, shipments, trade routes, nothing more. Thomas was cataloguing them for posterity. If he found something amiss, he never told me. Yet he died for it," said Sherlock softly. "And someone in this room knows why." The silence that followed was... "You cannot think one of us. It's unthinkable. Thomas was loyal, trusted. Who would want him dead?" Sherlock's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. "Loyalty, madame, can be a double-edged sword. It binds, but it also conceals. Let us consider another matter." He produced the pearl earring from his pocket, holding it up to the light. "This earring, found beneath the desk, belongs to Mademoiselle Eleanor. Yet she claims it was lost yesterday morning, before the library was swept. A lie, perhaps, or a truth twisted by fear." Eleanor's eyes flashed. "I am not lying. I don't know how it got there. Someone must have placed it to implicate me, or to distract us," said Sherlock, his tone deceptively mild. "The earring is a clue, but it is not the only one. There is another matter, a financial one, perhaps." He turned to Trevelyan, whose sullen expression hardened. "Monsieur Trevelyan, you are a man of business. Your ventures in London have not been without difficulty, have they? A debt, perhaps, or a promise unfulfilled?" Trevelyan's jaw clenched, but he forced a smile. "My affairs are my own, Monsieur Sherlock. I've had setbacks, as any businessman does, but I've no reason to harm a valet. This is absurd. Perhaps, said Sherlock, but the little grey cells note a pattern. A man in debt, a servant who knows too much, a family with secrets buried in the past. The crimson anchor, Monsieur Trevelyan, does it mean anything to you? Trevelyan shrugged, his eyes avoiding the detective's. It's a relic, nothing more. I've heard the stories. Some old trade deal from the East Indies. It's of no consequence to me. Sherlock's smile was faint but knowing. No consequence, yet it looms over this mystery like a shadow. Let us return to the library. There is more to uncover. The library, now stripped of its tragic occupant, seemed almost serene, yet the crimson anchor retained its air of menace. Sherlock moved to the desk, his fingers tracing the edges of Curnow's notebook. The discrepancy he noted, he said to Hastings, is no mere clerical error. The anchor, the shipping records, they point to a secret worth killing for. But whose secret? Hastings, peering at the notebook, frowned. The initials J.P. Josiah Penrose, surely, but he's long dead. Could it be someone else in the family? Or someone connected to the family, said Sherlock, his eyes narrowing. He examined the fireplace, focusing on the scratch on the anchor. This mark was made deliberately, Hastings, not an accident, but a sign. Someone touched this anchor recently, perhaps to retrieve something hidden within. He tapped the anchor lightly, listening to the sound. Solid, but not entirely so. There is a hollow space, perhaps a compartment. We shall need tools to investigate further. As they left the library, Sherlock paused in the corridor, his gaze lingering on a
Josiah Penrose, whose stern eyes seemed to guard the manor's secrets. "The past is alive in this house, Hastings," he said softly. "Curnow uncovered something that threatened someone present. The lies are surfacing, but they are not yet clear." Back in the drawing room, the tension had escalated. Trevelyan and Eleanor exchanged heated whispers, while Lady Margaret's eyes filled with tears. Sir Reginald, his face pale, confronted Sherlock. "Monsieur, you are tearing my family apart with these questions. What are you implying?" "I imply nothing, Sir Reginald," said Sherlock, his voice calm but unyielding. "I seek the truth. The earring, the financial troubles, the discrepancy in the records, these are cracks in the facade. Someone in this room knows more than they admit, and I shall find them." As the afternoon faded into evening, Hastings felt the mystery tightening its grip. The lies were surfacing, each one a thread in Sherlock's tapestry, but the pattern remained elusive. The crimson anchor, the poisoned valet, the locked door. These were pieces of a puzzle only Sherlock Holmes could solve. And Hastings knew the truth was drawing closer, sharp and unforgiving, as the cliffs beyond the manor's walls. Chapter 8. The Emotional Turning Point. The evening shadows lengthened across Trewergy Manor, cloaking the drawing room in a sombre twilight that mirrored the growing unrest among its occupants. The death of Thomas Curnow, the valet, in the locked library had unravelled the fragile civility of the Penrose household. And the mounting clues, the pearl earring, the missing tea tray, the scratched crimson anchor, and the cryptic notebook, had tightened the noose of suspicion around the gathered company. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the fireplace, felt the air thick with unspoken accusations, each guest a potential player in a deadly game. The mystery, with its layers of deception, was reaching a critical juncture, and only Sherlock Holmes, with his unerring logic, could navigate its complexities. Sherlock stood by the window, his small, precise figure framed against the fading light, his waxed moustache gleaming faintly in the glow of the oil lamps. His eyes, sharp and relentless, scanned the room, noting every gesture, every flicker of emotion. Sir Reginald Penrose, his face haggard, sat with his hands clasped tightly, his authority diminished by the weight of the tragedy. Lady Margaret, her delicate features drawn, clutched her handkerchief as though it were a lifeline. Eleanor Penrose, her auburn hair dishevelled, stared at the floor, her earlier defiance giving way to a quiet anguish. Julian Trevelyan, accused and defensive, paced near the mantel, his charm replaced by a brittle edge. Dr. Lawrence Cavendish, the physician, sat rigidly,
His notebook, his practical demeanor strained by the mounting tension. "Mes amis," said Sherlock, his voice a calm beacon in the storm. "We stand at a crossroads in this affair. The clues, the earring, the tray, the anchor, the notebook point to a truth hidden beneath layers of deception. Yet the truth requires more than facts. It requires the heart. Someone in this room holds a secret that is broken under the weight of this crime. I ask you now to speak, to unburden yourselves before the little grey cells uncover what you would conceal." The silence that followed was oppressive, broken only by the crackle of the fire. Then, to Hastings's surprise, Lady Margaret rose, her frail frame trembling, her eyes brimming with tears. "Monsieur Sherlock," she said, her voice breaking, "I cannot bear this any longer. I must speak, though it pains me. Thomas was more than a valet to this family. He was my confidant." A murmur of shock rippled through the room. Sir Reginald's head snapped up, his face a mask of disbelief. "Margaret, what are you saying?" Lady Margaret's hands twisted her handkerchief, her voice barely audible. "Years ago, when I was unwell, after Eleanor's birth, Thomas was kind to me. He listened, he understood. We grew close, not in any improper way, but as friends. He knew things about me, about this family, that I shared in moments of weakness. I fear he may have known too much." Sherlock's eyes softened, but his question was precise. "Madam, what did he know? A secret tied to the Crimson Anchor, perhaps? Or to the shipping records he was cataloguing?" Lady Margaret hesitated, her gaze flickering toward her husband. "He knew of, financial troubles from long ago. My father's debts, which Sir Reginald settled when we married. Thomas found papers in the library, old letters from Captain Josiah Penrose hinting at something. Shameful. A deal, perhaps, that brought wealth, but at a cost. He never told me the details, but he was troubled by it." Sir Reginald's face darkened, his voice low and strained. "Margaret, why did you never tell me this? Thomas was my valet, my trusted servant. If he uncovered something, he should have come to me." "I was afraid," whispered Lady Margaret, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I thought it was in the past, buried. But Thomas was curious, too curious. I begged him to leave it alone, but he said it was his duty to protect the family's honor." Eleanor, her eyes wide, stepped forward. "Mother, you knew he was looking into the records. Why didn't you stop him?"
"Monsieur Trevelyan, have a way of revealing truths. Madame Penrose has given us a piece of the puzzle. A secret tied to the past, to Captain Josiah Penrose and the Crimson Anchor. But there is more." He turned to Dr. Cavendish, whose nervous tic had intensified. "Doctor, you were close to Thomas Curnow, were you not? As the family physician, you saw him often. Did he ever confide in you about these records?" Cavendish adjusted his spectacles, his voice measured but strained. "He mentioned the records once, in passing. He said he'd found something odd, a shipment listed in 1842 that didn't add up. He thought it might be a clerical error, but he was excited." as though it meant more. I advised him to speak to Sir Reginald, but he said he needed more proof. Sherlock's eyes gleamed. Proof of what, Doctor? A crime? A scandal? Or something that still threatens this family? Cavendish hesitated, his fingers tightening on his spectacles. I don't know, Monsieur Sherlock. He was vague, but he was determined. I thought it harmless, a servant's curiosity. Harmless, mused Sherlock. Yet it cost him his life. He turned to the group, his voice rising slightly. The cracks are widening, mes amis. The lies are crumbling. Thomas Curnow died because he uncovered a secret someone in this room wished to keep buried. I urge you to speak now, before the truth forces your hand. The room erupted into chaos. Eleanor, her voice trembling, turned on Trevelyan. Julian, you were near the library. Did you know what Thomas was working on? Did you do something? Trevelyan's face flushed with anger. How dare you, Eleanor? I loved you, and now you accuse me? I had nothing to do with this. Sir Reginald stood, his voice booming. Enough! This is my house, and I will not have my family torn apart by suspicion. Monsieur Sherlock, find the truth, but do not destroy us in the process. Sherlock remained unmoved, his gaze steady. The truth, Sir Reginald, does not destroy. It reveals. And it will be revealed, with or without your consent. Hastings, watching the scene, felt a pang of sympathy for the Penrose family, their unity shattered by Lady Margaret's confession. Yet he knew Sherlock was right. The emotional outpouring was a turning point, a crack in the facade that would lead them closer to the killer. He followed Sherlock as they returned to the library, the detective's mind clearly racing. In the library, the crimson anchor seemed to loom larger, its scratched surface a silent witness to the crime. Sherlock knelt by the fireplace, examining the scratch with his magnifying glass. The anchor holds a secret, Hastings, he said softly. A compartment, perhaps, or a marker. Curnow found something in the records that pointed—
It make her a suspect? Or is it Trevelyan, with his debts and his presence near the library?
Patience, mon ami, said Sherlock, rising. The emotional turning point has given us a glimpse of the truth, but the pattern is not yet complete. The anchor, the poison, the earring, they are threads, and we are close to weaving them together. As they left the library, the manor seemed to pulse with secrets, the shadows deepening with the approach of night. Hastings knew that Sherlock's little grey cells were working tirelessly, piecing together the lies and truths that would unmask the killer. The crimson anchor, with its hidden history, was the key, and the truth was closer than ever, sharp and unforgiving as the cliffs beyond. Chapter 9. The Trap. The evening air in Truworgy Manor was heavy with the scent of old wood and wax, the ancient walls seeming to close in as the mystery of Thomas Curnow's death reached a fever pitch. The emotional revelations of the afternoon, Lady Margaret's confession of her closeness to the valet, the hints of a scandal tied to the crimson anchor, and the growing discord among the Penrose household had left the company on edge, each guest a suspect in a web of deception. Captain Arthur Hastings, standing near the drawing-room's tall windows, felt the tension like a coiled spring, ready to snap. The locked library, the poisoned vial, the pearl earring, and the scratched anchor had woven a puzzle that only Sherlock Holmes, with his meticulous logic, could unravel. Sherlock stood at the center of the room, his small, precise figure a beacon of calm amidst the storm of suspicion. His waxed mustache gleamed in the lamplight, and his eyes, sharp as a blade, surveyed the gathered company. Sir Reginald Penrose, his face etched with strain. Lady Margaret, her frail form trembling. Eleanor Penrose, her auburn hair framing a face torn between defiance and fear. Julian Trevelyan, his charm replaced by a sullen defensiveness. Dr. Lawrence Cavendish, his spectacles glinting nervously, and Mrs. Clara Vane, her sharp eyes watching with predatory intensity. Inspector Japp, stationed by the door, clutched his notebook, his practical demeanor strained by the complexity of the case. "Mes amis," said Sherlock, his voice smooth yet commanding, "we are close to the truth, but it is a truth guarded by lies. The death of Thomas Curnow was no accident, nor was it a simple act of passion. It was a calculated crime, and the killer is among us. Tonight I shall set a trap to draw them out, for the guilty cannot resist the pressure of their own conscience." A murmur of unease rippled through the room. Sir Reginald, his voice hoarse, protested. "Monsieur Sherlock, they have outwitted us, but they have left traces, threads in the tapestry of this crime. The earring, the missing tray, the scratched anchor, the notebook. These are not mere clues, but arrows pointing to the truth. I shall now reveal a new piece of evidence, and we shall see who flinches." He reached into his pocket and produced a small, folded piece of paper, its edges worn but intact. "This," he said, holding it aloft, "was found tucked inside Thomas Curnow's notebook, hidden between the pages. It is a letter dated 1842 from Captain Josiah Penrose to an unknown recipient. It speaks of a crimson debt repaid in Batavia, a deal sealed with the anchor as a symbol. The letter hints at a cargo not recorded in the official logs, a cargo of great value and greater shame." The room erupted in gasps. Lady Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, and Eleanor's eyes widened. Trevelyan's pacing stopped abruptly, while Dr. Cavendish's spectacles slipped slightly down his nose. Mrs. Vane's smile faltered, her fingers tightening on her shawl. Sherlock continued, his voice steady. "Thomas Curnow found this letter, and it cost him his life. The crimson anchor is no mere heirloom. It is a key to a secret someone in this room would kill to protect. I propose we examine the anchor itself. If, as I suspect, it conceals a hidden compartment, we may find the final piece of the puzzle." Sir Reginald rose, his face pale. "Monsieur Sherlock, that anchor has hung in the library for generations. It is a family treasure, nothing more. You cannot think it holds some sinister secret." "I think, Sir Reginald," said Sherlock, "that the anchor holds the truth. Let us go to the library now, all of us, and test my hypothesis. The guilty will not be able to resist revealing themselves." The company filed into the library, their footsteps echoing in the silent corridor. The room, bathed in the flickering light of oil lamps, seemed to pulse with secrets. The crimson anchor looming above the fireplace, like a silent judge. Sherlock, with Hastings and Japp at his side, approached the anchor, his magnifying glass in hand. He tapped its surface, listening to the faint, hollow echo. "As I suspected," he said, "there is a compartment within. With your permission, Sir Reginald, I shall open it." Sir Reginald hesitated, his eyes darting to his wife and daughter. "Do what you must, Monsieur Sherlock. But opium smuggled from Batavia in 1842, hidden beneath legitimate cargo. The profits funded the Penrose fortune, but the deal was struck with blood. A rival trader was betrayed, his ship sunk to conceal the crime. The crimson anchor was a gift from the merchant who brokered the deal, a symbol of their pact. A collective gasp filled the room. Lady Margaret swayed, and Sir Reginald caught her, his face ashen. "My God," he whispered. "I knew nothing of this. My great-grandfather? A criminal?" "The past is not your crime, Sir Reginald," said Sherlock, "but its shadow has fallen on this house. Thomas Curnow found this journal, and someone ensured he would never reveal its contents." Eleanor's voice, sharp with anguish, broke the silence. "Who, Monsieur Sherlock? Who would kill for this? It's ancient history." Sherlock's gaze swept the room, lingering on each face. "The killer is here, mademoiselle, and they are watching. The journal confirms the motive, but the method, the poison, the locked door, the earring, points to their identity. I invite you all to speak now, to confess before I name you." The tension was unbearable, the silence stretching like a taut wire. Then, to Hastings's shock, Dr. Cavendish stepped forward, his spectacles glinting, his voice trembling but resolute. "Monsieur Sherlock, I cannot let this continue. I knew of the journal. Thomas showed it to me days ago. He was going to tell Sir Reginald, to clear the family's name. I begged him not to, for fear of the scandal, but I did not kill him." Sherlock's eyes narrowed. "You knew, Doctor, yet you said nothing. Why?" Cavendish's shoulders slumped. "I am a Penrose by blood, a distant cousin. The family's honor is my own. I thought I could persuade Thomas to stay silent. But I swear, I did not harm him." The room erupted in murmurs, accusations flying. Trevelyan pointed at Cavendish, his voice rising. "You had motive, Doctor. You were in your room, alone, with no alibi." Eleanor turned on Trevelyan, her eyes blazing. "And you, Julian? You were near the library with your debts and your secrets. Don't point fingers." Sherlock raised a hand, silencing the chaos. "Enough. The trap has been sprung, and the guilty are uneasy. The journal is the key, but the poisoner's hand is revealed by their actions. I shall retire to consider this new evidence. Tomorrow we shall gather again, and the truth will be laid bare." As the company dispersed, their faces pale with fear and suspicion, Hastings followed Sherlock to their rooms, his mind reeling. "Sherlock, that was brilliant. You flushed them out with the journal. But who is it? Cavendish, Trevelyan, someone else?" Sherlock's smile was... Night closed over Trewargy Manor, the shadows deepening as the truth drew nearer, sharp and relentless as the cliffs beyond. Chapter 10. The Reveal. The morning sun rose over Trewargy Manor, its pale light filtering through the heavy drapes of the drawing room, where the air was thick with anticipation and dread. The death of Thomas Curnow, the valet in the locked library, had cast a long shadow over the Penrose household, and the revelations of the previous evening, the hidden journal, the crimson anchor's dark history, and Dr. Cavendish's admission, had brought the mystery to a boiling point. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated near the fireplace, felt the tension in the room like a storm about to break. The clues, the pearl earring, the missing tea tray, the scratched anchor, and the damning journal had woven a tapestry of deception, and only Sherlock Holmes, with his unerring logic, could reveal the final pattern. Sherlock stood at the center of the room, his small, precise figure radiating an air of quiet triumph. His waxed mustache gleamed in the morning light, and his eyes, sharp and unrelenting, swept over the assembled company. Sir Reginald Penrose, his face haggard with the weight of his family's shame. Lady Margaret, frail and tearful. Eleanor Penrose, her auburn hair framing a face taut with fear. Julian Trevelyan, his earlier charm replaced by a defensive scowl. Dr. Lawrence Cavendish, his spectacles glinting with nervous anticipation, and Mrs. Clara Vane, her sharp eyes betraying a flicker of unease. Inspector Japp, stationed by the door, clutched his notebook, his practical demeanor softened by growing respect for Sherlock's methods. "Mes amis," said Sherlock, his voice smooth yet commanding, "we have reached the moment of truth. The death of Thomas Curnow was no accident, no suicide, but a murder most calculated, designed to protect a secret buried in the past. The crimson anchor, the poison vial, the earring, the journal, these are the threads of a tapestry woven by a cunning hand. Today I shall unravel it, step by step, and name the killer among you." A hush fell over the room, the silence broken only by the distant crash of waves against the Cornish cliffs. Sherlock continued, his tone measured but relentless. "Let us begin with the facts. Thomas Curnow was found dead in the library, a locked room with a vial of poison beside him. The door was locked, the key in his pocket, yet the maid Mary Polkinghorne found it ajar. The poison, a swift and potent alkaloid, was not in the vial, but in the tea he drank, the tray of which was removed to conceal the method. The pearl earring, belonging to Mademoiselle Eleanor, was found beneath the desk, suggesting a presence in the room. The crimson anchor,
Loyalty, Sir Reginald, said Sherlock, is a virtue that can mask darker motives. Let us consider the suspects. Monsieur Trevelyan, your presence near the library, your financial troubles, and your Turkish cigarette stub made you an obvious target. Yet the evidence was too neat, a red herring designed to mislead. Mademoiselle Eleanor, your earring and your conversation with Curnow about the records suggested involvement, but your distress was genuine. Dr. Cavendish, your knowledge of the journal and your family ties gave you motive, but your confession was too open, too unguarded. Madame Vane, your sharp observations and silence hinted at hidden knowledge, but you lacked the opportunity. Lady Margaret, your closeness to Curnow and fear of scandal pointed to a secret, but not to murder. He paused, his eyes gleaming. The key lies in the method, the locked door, the poison, the anchor. The killer needed access to the library, knowledge of Curnow's habits, and a reason to silence him. The journal revealed the Penrose fortune's illicit origins, a scandal that could ruin the family's name and halt Mademoiselle Eleanor's marriage to a man of standing. But the killer was not protecting the family. They were protecting themselves. Sherlock turned to Sir Reginald, his voice softening but unyielding. "Sir Reginald, it was you who killed Thomas Curnow." A collective gasp filled the room. Lady Margaret cried out, clutching her husband's arm, while Eleanor's eyes widened in horror. Trevelyan stepped forward, his voice sharp. "That's absurd! Sir Reginald loved Thomas like a son!" Sherlock raised a hand, silencing the uproar. "Let me explain. Sir Reginald, you knew of the journal's contents, for Thomas confided in you days ago, as he did with Dr. Cavendish. He told you of the opium smuggling, the blood on your family's name. You could not bear the thought of exposure, not for the scandal, but for what it would reveal about you. The journal mentioned a crimson debt repaid in Batavia, but it also named a descendant who profited from the trade in recent years, a secret deal you struck to shore up the family's dwindling finances." Sir Reginald's face drained of color, his voice a hoarse whisper. "This is madness, Monsieur Sherlock. I am no murderer." "Yet the evidence speaks," said Sherlock. "The tea tray was removed by you, Sir Reginald, to hide the poison's delivery. You had access to the library's spare key kept in your study, which you used to enter after poisoning Curnow's tea. You unlocked the door, placed the crimson vial, a theatrical touch to point to the anchor, and left it ajar to confuse the timeline. The earring was a mistake, dropped by Mademoiselle Eleanor during an earlier visit, but you seized it to cast suspicion on her or Trevelyan. The scratch on the anchor was your doing, when you checked the journal's hiding place, ensuring no one else would find it." Lady Margaret sobbed, her voice breaking.
Reginald, tell me it's not true. Sir Reginald's shoulders slumped, his face crumpling. I did it for us, Margaret. The scandal would have ruined us, destroyed Eleanor's future. Thomas was going to expose it all, to the papers, to the world. I begged him to stay silent, but he was stubborn, obsessed with honor. I used the poison from my old chemistry set, a relic from my youth. It was quick, painless. I never meant to hurt anyone. Eleanor turned away, tears streaming down her face, while Trevelyan stared in disbelief. Dr. Cavendish shook his head, his voice low. You should have trusted us, Reginald. We could have faced it together. Sherlock's expression was somber, but resolute. The truth, Sir Reginald, cannot be buried. You sought to protect your family, but you destroyed it in the process. Inspector Japp, you may take him. Japp stepped forward, his face grim, as he placed a hand on Sir Reginald's shoulder. Sir Reginald Penrose, you're under arrest for the murder of Thomas Curnow. As Sir Reginald was led away, the room dissolved into chaos. Lady Margaret's sobs, Eleanor's anguished cries, Trevelyan's muttered curses. Hastings, watching the scene, felt a pang of sorrow for the shattered family, yet he marveled at Sherlock's brilliance. How did you know, Sherlock? He asked as they stepped into the corridor. The little grey cells, Hastings, said Sherlock, his voice soft. The anchor was the key, not just a symbol, but a confession. Sir Reginald's fear of exposure was written in his every glance, his every hesitation. The locked door was no mystery, for he held the spare key. The crimson vial was his flourish, meant to mislead, but it pointed to his guilt. The manor seemed to sigh as the truth was laid bare, the crimson anchor's shadow no longer a mystery, but a monument to a family's fall. Sherlock's work was done, but the cost of his revelation lingered in the air, heavy as the Cornish mist. Chapter 11. The Reflection. The morning after Sir Reginald Penrose's arrest cast a pall over Trewargy Manor, the once proud estate now cloaked in a silence that spoke of shattered trust and broken bonds. The Cornish cliffs beyond the manor's windows stood as impassive witnesses to the tragedy, their rugged outlines softened by a thin mist that rolled in from the sea. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the drawing-room, felt the weight of the previous day's revelation pressing upon him. The crimson anchor, the poisoned vial, the hidden journal, and the damning truth of Sir Reginald's guilt had unravelled the Penrose family, leaving behind a wreckage of grief and betrayal. Sherlock Holmes, his small melancholy. The room was nearly empty. Lady Margaret had retired to her chambers, overwhelmed by sorrow, while Eleanor Penrose, her auburn hair pulled back in a severe knot, sat alone in a corner, her face pale and drawn. Julian Trevelyan, Dr. Lawrence Cavendish, and Mrs. Clara Vane had dispersed to their rooms, each grappling with the aftermath of the truth. Inspector Japp, having overseen Sir Reginald's removal to the local constabulary, had left to file his report, promising to return later. Hastings, stirring his tea absently, broke the silence. Sherlock, I must say, you were brilliant yesterday. The way you pieced it all together, the spare key, the tea tray, the crimson vial, it was like watching a master painter complete a canvas. But I can't help feeling sorry for the family. Sir Reginald's actions, they've torn them apart. Sherlock turned from the window, his expression somber but resolute. But ami, the truth is a surgeon's knife. It cuts, but it also heals. Sir Reginald's crime was born of fear, a desire to protect his family's name, but it was a false protection built on lies. The little grey cells revealed the truth, but the cost, as you say, is heavy. He moved to a chair, his movement deliberate, and sat, steepling his fingers before him. Let us reflect, Hastings, on the nature of this case. The crimson anchor was not merely a relic, but a symbol of guilt, a reminder of a sin buried in the past. Captain Josiah Penrose's opium trade wrought wealth, but stained the family's honor. Sir Reginald, discovering through Curnow's diligence that this secret was at risk, chose murder over exposure. It was a choice of pride, not reason. Hastings nodded, his mind replaying the dramatic scene of the previous evening. The way you laid it out, the spare key, the poison in the tea, the earring as a misdirection. It was all so clear once you explained it. But how did you know it was Sir Reginald? There were so many suspects, so many threads. Sherlock's moustache twitched, a faint smile playing beneath it. The threads, Hastings, are what guide us. Each clue, the earring, the tray, the journal, was a piece of the puzzle, but it was Sir Reginald's behavior that betrayed him. His insistence on Curnow's loyalty, his reluctance to discuss the anchor, his nervous glances when the journal was mentioned, these were the signs of a man burdened by guilt. The spare key, kept in his study, was the final proof. Only he had the means to enter the locked library undetected, to administer the poison, and to stage the scene with the crimson vial. Eleanor, who had been listening silently, rose, her voice trembling but firm. "Monsieur Sherlock, I don't know whether to thank you or curse you. You've saved us from a lie, but you've destroyed my father. How are we to go on?" Sherlock's gaze softened.
Father's crime was his own, not yours. You must rebuild, not on secrets, but on honesty. The crimson anchor will no longer cast its shadow over you. Eleanor's eyes filled with tears, but she nodded, her shoulders straightening. I suppose you're right. But it's hard. So hard. Hastings, moved by her words, glanced at Sherlock. What about the journal, Sherlock? Will it be made public? The scandal could ruin them. Sherlock shook his head. The journal is evidence, but its contents need not be broadcast. Inspector Japp is a practical man. He will focus on the murder, not the history. The Penrose name will bear its scars in private, as it should. He rose, his eyes drifting to the portrait of Captain Josiah Penrose, whose stern gaze seemed to follow them. This case, Hastings, reminds us of the fragility of human pride. Sir Reginald sought to protect his family's honor, but in doing so, he betrayed it. The little gray cells, they see not only the crime, but the heart behind it. We must use them not to judge, but to understand. Hastings frowned, his practical mind grappling with the philosophical turn. But Sherlock, isn't it our job to catch the criminal, not to understand their motives? Sir Reginald killed a man. Surely that's the end of it. Sherlock's smile was faint, but knowing. The crime, mon ami, is but the surface. Beneath it lies the why, the fears, the desires, the secrets that drive a man to such extremes. To solve a mystery is to illuminate the human soul. That is the work of Sherlock Holmes. As the morning wore on, Sherlock prepared to depart, his task complete. He gathered his small valise, his movements precise as ever, and bid farewell to Eleanor, who managed a weak smile. "Thank you, Monsieur Sherlock," she said. "You've given us a chance to start again, however painful it may be." Sherlock inclined his head, his voice soft. "Courage, mademoiselle. The truth sets us free, even when it hurts." As they stepped into the courtyard, where a carriage awaited to take them to the station, Hastings glanced back at the manor, its ivy-clad towers standing resolute against the sea. "It's a sad business, Sherlock," he said. "The Penroses will never be the same." "No, Hastings," said Sherlock, climbing into the carriage. "But they will be true, and that is a beginning."
The carriage rolled away, the manor receding into the mist, its secrets laid bare by the relentless logic of Sherlock Holmes. The crimson anchor, once a symbol of pride and shame, was now merely an object, its power broken by the truth. As the cliffs of Cornwall faded from view, Hastings felt
air still seemed to hum with the aftershocks of Sir Reginald Penrose's confession. The morning mist had burned away, revealing a sky of pale blue, but the cliffs and sea beyond retained their sombre majesty, as though mourning the secrets laid bare within the manor's walls. Hastings, seated opposite Sherlock, gazed out at the rugged landscape, his mind replaying the dramatic unravelling of the Crimson Anchor's mystery. The locked library, the poisoned tea, the hidden journal, and Sir Reginald's desperate act to protect his family's name had woven a tragedy that lingered like the salt in the air. Sherlock, his small frame nestled comfortably in the carriage's plush interior, appeared lost in thought, his fingers steepled before him, his eyes fixed on some invisible point beyond the horizon. His waxed moustache gleamed faintly in the filtered light, and his expression, though calm, carried a trace of the introspective melancholy that often followed the resolution of a case. Hastings, accustomed to his friend's silences, felt compelled to break it, his voice tinged with both admiration and unease. "Sherlock," he began, "I must say this case has left me rather shaken. To think that Sir Reginald, a man of such standing, could resort to murder. It's a grim reminder of how far pride can lead one astray. But how did you know the journal would break him? That trap you set in the library was a masterstroke." Sherlock's eyes flickered with a faint smile, though his tone remained measured. "Mon ami, the journal was not the trap. It was the bait. Sir Reginald's guilt was written in his every glance, his every hesitation when the anchor or the records were mentioned. The journal, with its damning account of his ancestors' crimes and his own complicity in a modern echo of them, was the key to unlocking his conscience. A guilty mind cannot resist the pressure of exposure, Hastings. By revealing the journal, I forced him to confront his own deception." Hastings nodded, his brow furrowing. "But the spare key, how did you deduce it was in his study? You never mentioned searching there." Sherlock's moustache twitched, a sign of quiet amusement. "The little grey cells, Hastings. Sir Reginald spoke of the library as Thomas Curnow's domain, yet he alone had authority over the manor's keys. A spare key for the library, kept in his private study, was a logical necessity for a man of his control. When Mary Polkinghorne found the door ajar, despite the key in Curnow's pocket, the solution was clear. Someone with access to the spare had entered and left, staging the scene with the crimson vial to mislead us." Hastings shook his head, marvelling. "It's astonishing, Sherlock. The way you pieced it together, the tea tray, the earring, the scratch on the anchor, it all seems so obvious now. But what about Eleanor and Trevelyan? Do you think they'll recover from this?" Sherlock's gaze softened, his voice tinged with him.
Sympathy. The young are resilient, Hastings, but the wound is deep. Mademoiselle Eleanor must bear the shame of her father's crime, and Monsieur Trevelyan, though innocent of murder, carries his own burdens of debt and ambition. Their love may endure, but it will be tested. As for Lady Margaret, her fragility hides a strength that may yet guide them through. The carriage jolted slightly, and Sherlock adjusted his position, his eyes returning to the window. This case, Hastings, is a study in the human heart. Sir Reginald acted out of love for his family, yet love twisted by pride became his downfall. The Crimson Anchor, a symbol of wealth and shame, was his silent accuser. We have done our work, but the echoes of truth will linger in that house for years to come. Hastings leaned back, his mind turning to the manor they had left behind. "I suppose you're right, Sherlock. But it's a grim sort of justice. The Penrose family's name is tarnished, and poor Curnow paid the ultimate price for his loyalty." Loyalty.
said Sherlock, his voice soft but firm, "is a noble virtue, but it must be tempered by wisdom. Thomas Curnow sought to protect the family by uncovering the truth, but he underestimated the fear it would provoke. The little grey cells, Hastings, see not only the crime, but the motives behind it. To solve a mystery is to understand the frailties that drive men to such acts." The carriage approached the small station at St. Kevin, where a train awaited to carry them back to London. As they disembarked, Hastings glanced back toward the direction of Trewargy Manor, its towers now hidden by the rolling hills. "Do you think we'll hear from them again, Sherlock? The Penroses, I mean." Sherlock adjusted his hat, his expression enigmatic. "Perhaps, mon ami, but their story is no longer ours. The truth has been revealed, and they must find their own path forward. For us, there are other mysteries, other tapestries to unravel." As they boarded the train, the whistle sounded and the carriage lurched forward, carrying them away from the Cornish coast. Hastings settled into his seat, his mind still lingering on the crimson anchor and the secrets it had guarded. Sherlock, beside him, opened a small notebook, already sketching the outlines of a new case. His little grey cells ever restless, ever seeking the next challenge. The train steamed through the countryside, the cliffs and sea fading into memory. But the echoes of the crimson anchor's truth remained, a testament to the power of Sherlock Holmes's relentless logic. And the fragile confession had left an indelible mark, and the weight of the tragedy seemed to cling to the very air. Hastings, seated opposite Sherlock Holmes in their first-class compartment, gazed out at the passing fields, their golden hues tinged with the melancholy of late summer. The mystery was solved, the killer named, yet the ripples of truth continued to spread, unseen but profound. Sherlock, his small, precise figure as composed as ever, sat with a small leather-bound book in his lap, though his eyes were fixed on the horizon beyond the window. His wax moustache gleamed faintly in the soft light, and his expression, though calm, carried a trace of the introspective gravity that followed a case of such emotional depth. Hastings, ever the companion attuned to his friend's moods, broke the silence, his voice tinged with curiosity and concern. "Sherlock," he began, "this case at Trewargy Manor, one of the most troubling we faced, isn't it? The way it tore the Penrose family apart, all for a secret buried generations ago. Do you ever wonder about the consequences of our work? We uncover the truth, but what happens to those left behind?" Sherlock closed his book with a deliberate snap, his eyes meeting Hastings with a piercing clarity. "Mon ami, you touch upon the heart of our profession. The truth is a light that illuminates, but it can also burn. The Penrose family will bear the scars of Sir Reginald's crime, yet without the truth, they would have lived in a shadow of lies. The little grey cells seek clarity, not comfort. We expose the unseen ripples, Hastings, but we cannot control where they flow." Hastings frowned, his practical mind wrestling with the philosophical weight of Sherlock's words. "I suppose you're right, but I can't help thinking of Eleanor and Lady Margaret. Poor Eleanor, losing her father to prison, and Lady Margaret facing the ruin of their name. And Trevelyan, do you think he'll stand by her with all his debts and ambitions?" Sherlock's moustache twitched, a faint smile betraying his amusement at Hastings' sentimentality. "Monsieur Trevelyan is a man of charm,
But charm is a fragile foundation for loyalty. His debts, as you note, may pull him away. Yet Mademoiselle Eleanor has a strength that may surprise us. As for Lady Margaret, her fragility conceals a resilience born of love for her daughter. The ripples of this case will test them, but they are not without hope. The train jolted slightly, and Sherlock adjusted his position, his fingers steepled before him. Consider, Hastings, the nature of the crimson anchor. It was a symbol of pride, of wealth, but also of shame, a reminder of Captain Josiah Penrose's crimes. Sir Reginald believed he could bury that shame, but in doing peaked.
But how did you know the journal was the key, Sherlock? You suspected Sir Reginald from the start, didn't you? What gave him the way? Sherlock's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a puzzle well solved. Not from the start, mon ami, but early enough. The clues, the locked door, the missing tea tray, the crimson vial pointed to a mind that planned meticulously yet faltered under pressure. Sir Reginald's demeanour betrayed him. His insistence on Curnow's loyalty, his unease when the anchor was mentioned, his overzealous defence of the family's honour. The spare key, kept in his study, was a logical deduction, for only he had the authority and opportunity to use it. The journal, hidden in the anchor, confirmed his motive, a fear of exposure that drove him to murder. Hastings shook his head, marvelling. It's extraordinary, Sherlock. The way you saw through the red herrings, the earring, Trevelyan's cigarette stub, even Cavendish's confession. You knew they were distractions. Précisément, said Sherlock. The human mind loves simplicity, Hastings. It seizes on the obvious, Trevelyan's debts, Eleanor's earring, and ignores the subtle. But the little grey cells see the pattern beneath. The earring was a mistake, dropped by Eleanor during an innocent visit, but Sir Reginald used it to cast suspicion elsewhere. The tea tray, removed to hide the poison's delivery, was his fatal error. The crimson vial was a flourish, meant to tie the crime to the anchor's legend, but it revealed his theatrical streak. The train slowed as it approached a small station, the platform bustling with passengers. Hastings glanced out, his thoughts drifting back to Trevorgy Manor. What do you think will happen to the anchor now? Will they keep it, after all it represents? Sherlock's gaze followed Hastings, his voice soft but firm. The anchor is a relic, nothing more. Its power was in the secret it guarded. Now that the truth is known, it is merely an object, a reminder of the past, but no longer a threat. I suspect Eleanor will have it removed, a step towards healing. As the train pulled away from the station, Hastings felt a pang of sympathy for the Penrose family. It's a grim sort of ending, isn't it? Justice is done, but at what cost? Sherlock's expression softened, a rare glimpse of his humanity. Justice, Hastings, is not always kind, but it is necessary. The ripples of truth may wound, but they also cleanse. The Penroses will rebuild, as families do, and we move on to the next mystery. The compartment fell silent, the clatter of the train filling the void. Hastings leaned back, his mind still tangled in the events at Trevorgy Manor. Sherlock, ever restless, opened his notebook once more, his pencil sketching the outlines of a new case. The crimson anchor was behind them, its enigma solved, but its echoes lingered, a testament to the world of Sherlock Holmes. Chapter 14. The Weight of Legacy. The train steamed steadily through the English countryside, its rhythmic clatter a soothing counterpoint to the heavy silence that hung between Captain Arthur Hastings and Sherlock Holmes. The fields outside the window, bathed in the golden light of late afternoon, seemed to stretch endlessly, yet Hastings' thoughts remained tethered to Trevorgy Manor, where the crimson anchor's dark secret had unraveled a family. The murder of Thomas Curnow, the damning journal, and Sir Reginald Penrose's confession had resolved the mystery, but the aftermath lingered like a shadow, casting doubt on the cost of truth. Hastings, his soldier's heart stirred by the tragedy, glanced at his friend, seeking to anchor his restless mind. Sherlock, seated opposite, was the picture of composure, his small frame nestled in the plush seat, his waxed mustache gleaming faintly in the fading light. His eyes, sharp and contemplative, were fixed on a small notebook in his lap, though he had not written a word in some time. The weight of the case, though solved, seemed to occupy his thoughts, and Hastings, ever attuned to his friend's moods, ventured to break the silence. "Sherlock," he said, his voice tinged with reflection, "this business at Treworgy Manor, it's left me thinking about legacy. The Penroses built their name on wealth, but it was rotten at the core, wasn't it? That opium trade, the Crimson Anchor, it's as if the past reached out to destroy them. Do you think every family carries such burdens?" Sherlock closed his notebook with a deliberate motion, his gaze meeting Hastings's with a clarity that cut through the melancholy. "Mon ami, every family, like every man, carries a legacy of light and shadow. The Penroses' wealth was born of Captain Josiah's crime, but it was Sir Reginald's choice to kill that brought the shadow to life. The Crimson Anchor was a symbol, not a curse. It was human pride, not fate, that led to tragedy." Hastings nodded, his brow furrowing. "I suppose you're right, but it's hard to shake the image of Eleanor and Lady Margaret, left to pick up the pieces. And poor Curnow, he was only doing his duty, wasn't he? Digging into those records to protect the family's honor." Sherlock's mustache twitched, a faint sign of amusement, tempered by sympathy. "Duty, Hastings, is a noble thing, but it can blind us to danger. Thomas Curnow was meticulous, loyal, but naive. He believed the truth would serve the Penroses, yet he failed to see the fear it would provoke in Sir Reginald. The little grey cells, they see not only the facts, but the human heart behind them. Curnow's death was a tragedy of miscalculation." Hastings leaned forward.
With the anchor right there, it was like watching a play unfold. Sherlock's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a puzzle well solved. The trap, Hastings, was not the journal itself, but the moment of its revelation. Sir Reginald's guilt was evident in his demeanor, his nervous glances, his overzealous defense of the family's honor, his reluctance to discuss the anchor. When I produced the journal, I knew he could not withstand the weight of his secret exposed before his family. The human conscience, when pressed, seeks relief in confession. It was merely a matter of applying the right pressure at the right time. Hastings shook his head, marveling. "It's extraordinary, Sherlock. The way you saw through the distractions, the earring, Trevelyan's cigarette stub, even Cavendish's half-confession, you knew they were all pointing away from the truth." "Précisément," said Sherlock. "The killer relies on distraction, on the obvious to obscure their path. The earring was a careless mistake dropped by Mademoiselle Eleanor in an innocent moment, but Sir Reginald seized it to cast suspicion. The tea tray, removed to hide the poison's delivery, was his undoing, for its absence was as telling as its presence. The crimson vial was a theatrical flourish, meant to tie the crime to the anchor's legend, but it revealed his mind, a man who believed he could control the narrative. The train slowed as it approached a junction, the platform bustling with passengers under the late afternoon sun. Hastings glanced out, his thoughts drifting back to the manor. "What do you think will become of the Penrose fortune now? The scandal might not go public, but the family knows the truth. Can they rebuild after this?" Sherlock's expression softened, a rare glimpse of his humanity. "The fortune, Hastings, is but a shadow of its former self, diminished by Sir Reginald's secret dealings to maintain it. Mademoiselle Eleanor has the strength to forge a new path, perhaps with Monsieur Trevelyan, if his ambitions do not lead him astray. Lady Margaret will endure, as mothers do, for her daughter's sake.
The legacy of the Crimson Anchor is broken, and in its place they may build something honest, however modest. Hastings leaned back, his mind heavy with the weight of the case. It's a bittersweet ending, isn't it? Justice is served, but the cost is so high. I wonder if we've done more harm than good. Sherlock's gaze returned to the window, his voice soft but firm. The truth, mon ami, is neither good nor evil. It simply is. Our task is to uncover it, to bring order to chaos. The consequences are not ours to bear. But we must trust that clarity, however painful, is better than deception. The Penroses will carry their legacy forward, shaped by the truth we have revealed. As the train gathered speed, leaving the junction behind, Hastings felt a quiet resolve settle over him. The Crimson
Pride and shame was now merely an object, its power dispelled by Sherlock's relentless logic. The manor, the cliffs, the sea, they faded into the distance, but the lessons of the case lingered, a testament to the delicate balance of truth and legacy in the human heart. The train from St. Keverne steamed into the bustling heart of London, its whistle piercing the evening air as the city's lights began to twinkle against the gathering dusk. Captain Arthur Hastings, seated in the first-class compartment, felt a quiet relief at returning to the familiar chaos of the capital. Yet the shadow of Trevorgy Manor lingered in his mind. The Crimson Anchor, the poisoned valet, and Sir Reginald Penrose's confession had woven a tragedy that weighed heavily on his soldier's heart. The mystery was solved, the truth laid bare, but the final threads of its impact still needed weaving, and Hastings turned to his companion for closure. Sherlock Holmes, his small, precise figure as immaculate as ever, sat opposite, his valise neatly stowed beside him. His waxed mustache gleamed faintly in the compartment's lamplight, and his eyes, sharp yet reflective, gazed out at the approaching city. The resolution of the Crimson Anchor's enigma had been a triumph of his little grey cells, yet there was a quiet gravity in his demeanour, a sign that even he felt the weight of the case's consequences. Hastings, ever the faithful friend, broke the silence, his voice tinged with a mix of awe and melancholy. "Sherlock," he said, leaning forward, "we've left Trevorgy Manor behind, but I can't stop thinking about it. The Penroses, the anchor, the way it all unraveled, it's one of those cases that sticks with you, isn't it? You solved it brilliantly, but I wonder, do you ever feel the burden of what comes after?" Sherlock turned from the window, his gaze meeting Hastings's with a clarity that was both comforting and piercing. "Mon ami, you are sentimental as always," he said, a faint smile playing beneath his mustache. "But you are not wrong. The resolution of a mystery is a moment of order, of clarity, but it leaves ripples that we cannot always see. The Penroses will carry the weight of Sir Reginald's crime, yet they are free from the shadow of lies. That is the gift of truth, Hastings, even when it wounds." Hastings nodded, his thoughts drifting back to the manor's sombre halls. "I keep thinking of Eleanor, such a spirited young woman now facing a future without her father, and Lady Margaret, so fragile yet holding on for her daughter's sake. Do you think they'll find peace?" Sherlock's expression softened, a rare glimpse of his humanity. "Peace, Hastings, is a journey, not—"
Margaret, though broken by her husband's betrayal, has a mother's resolve. They will find their way, as families do, by facing the truth rather than hiding from it. Hastings leaned back, his mind turning to the mechanics of the case. "Your method, Sherlock, it's extraordinary. The way you saw through the distractions, the earring, the cigarette stub, even the crimson vial.
How did you know the poison was in the tea and not the vial? That was the key, wasn't it? Sherlock's eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of a puzzle well solved. The vial, Hastings, was a theatrical misdirection, a signature meant to tie the crime to the anchor's legend. Its crimson residue was too deliberate, too conspicuous. The missing tea tray, however, was the true clue. Why remove it unless it held the means of death? The poison, a swift alkaloid, was in the tea Curnow drank, delivered by Sir Reginald, who used the spare key to enter the library, administer the dose, and stage the scene. The earring, dropped by Mademoiselle Eleanor in an earlier visit, was a fortunate mistake he seized to cast suspicion elsewhere. Hastings shook his head, marveling. And the journal in the anchor, how did you know it was there? That hidden compartment was a stroke of genius. The anchor, said Sherlock, was more than a relic. It was a confession. The scratch on its surface, recent and deliberate, suggested it had been tampered with. Curnow's notebook, with its note about a discrepancy and the initials J.P., pointed to a secret tied to Captain Josiah Penrose. The hollow sound when I tapped the anchor confirmed my suspicion of a compartment. The journal within was the final thread, revealing the opium trade that funded the Penrose fortune and Sir Reginald's fear of its exposure. The train slowed as it approached Paddington Station, the platform bustling with travellers under the glow of gaslights. Hastings glanced out, his thoughts lingering on the manor's cliffs and sea. What will happen to the anchor now, Sherlock? Will it stay in the library, a reminder of all this? Sherlock adjusted his hat, his voice firm but gentle. The anchor's power was in its secret, Hastings. Now that the truth is known, it is merely an object, a relic of a tainted past. I suspect Mademoiselle Eleanor will have it removed, a step toward breaking the cycle of shame. The Penroses must build a new legacy, one founded on honesty. As the train came to a stop, Sherlock rose, gathering his valise with his usual precision. Come, Hastings. London awaits, and with it, new mysteries. The crimson anchor is behind us, its enigma solved. The little grey cells must rest, but not for long. They stepped onto the platform, the city's hum enveloping them. Hastings glanced back at the train, a symbol of their journey from the Cornish coast to the heart of England. The case of betrayal and the enduring power of truth would linger, a final thread in the tapestry of Sherlock Holmes's relentless pursuit of justice.